They told me to sell the only thing I truly owned, my car bought after years of working two jobs, saving every dime I could. They called it an act of love for my sister's future. But when I said no, their faces turned from pleading to cold fury. I'm Clarissa Moore, and this is the story of how I learned that family doesn't mean handing over your soul. Stay with me because what happened next didn't just shatter old expectations. It taught me that I was done living on borrowed time. Let me show you how I finally took it back. I've always been told I was built like a rock. My shoulders are broad, strong enough to carry whatever needed carrying: boxes, groceries, other people's burdens. My arms are thick and sun-browned from all those summers spent working to keep the lights on at home, and my hands are rough from years of grabbing, holding, and never letting go. I'm not what people call delicate. I've never been described as pretty in the same breath as my sister Scarlett. Scarlett was born with a softness I never had. She's like something out of a painting. Skin as pale as milk hair that catches the light like silk, and eyes so blue it's almost startling. Even when we were kids, people would stop to look at her. Neighbors, family, friends. They all seemed to have something sweet to say about how lovely she was. She had that easy, fragile grace that made people want to lean in closer. And they always did. Me, I was the one who held her up. When Scarlett fell apart, I was the one who steadied her. When things went wrong, I was the one who found the solution no matter how much it cost me. My mother's voice was a constant refrain. You're the strong one, Clarissa. You don't need the extras that Scarlett does. You're built for it. For a long time I believed her. I believed my broad shoulders and quiet strength were my purpose. I thought that being the one who never complained, who never wavered, meant I was doing what I was supposed to do. I was the big sister, the steady one. I was supposed to make sure Scarlett never had to feel the kind of fear that kept me up at night. I never asked for more. I never asked to be seen the way Scarlett was seen. I never asked for someone to look at me and see something worth protecting. I thought if I just kept going, if I kept being strong enough, patient enough, quiet enough, someone would notice that I was more than just the foundation everyone else built their lives on. Now I'm 35, living in a tiny apartment in Seattle. I like it here. The rain has always felt like home to me. Soft and persistent, gentle, but unyielding. Tonight it's drizzling steadily, turning the streetlights outside my window into glowing orbs that blur and shimmer like distant stars. I sit by the window, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, and watch the city breathe beneath the fog. I've been told so many times that I'm the strong one that I almost believed I didn't need anyone, that I didn't deserve the softness that seemed to cling so naturally to Scarlett. But the truth is, there were nights when I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling and feel the weight of all the things I'd carried pressing into my chest. Nights when I'd wonder if anyone would ever offer to carry them for me. I can still remember the birthdays, the family dinners, the endless holidays where Scarlett was always the center of the room. She was always the fragile one, the one people rushed to comfort. I was always there in the background, smiling and helping and making sure everyone else had what they needed. My mother used to say, Clarissa doesn't need much fuss. She's always been good at taking care of herself. But she never understood that taking care of everyone else didn't mean I didn't want someone to take care of me too. Tonight, as the rain tapped softly against the window, I let myself think about it. I let myself feel how tired I am. My reflection in the glass looks steady. Dark hair pulled back in a messy knot, shoulders straight, chin lifted. But behind the reflection is the truth. I'm tired of being the one who doesn't need anything. I think about Scarlett, about the way people melt when she looks at them with those soft eyes. I think about how many times I've told myself it's enough to be the one who helps, that I didn't need the same kind of kindness, the same kind of tenderness. And maybe for a while that was true, but I don't think it is anymore. I press my forehead against the cool glass, feeling the cold seep into my skin. Outside, the world is quiet and soft, and for once, I let that softness in. I let myself wonder, just wonder, what it would feel like if someone looked at me and saw more than just the girl who could carry it all. If someone saw that I was more than my wide shoulders and steady hands, that even mountains need rest. I take a slow breath and let it out in a shiver of fog on the window. My mother's words echo in my head. You're the strong one, Clarissa. And for the first time, I let myself see the truth beneath them. I am strong. I always have been. But that doesn't mean I don't want to be seen, to be known, to be loved for something more than my ability to hold everything together. For so long, I thought that was asking for too much. But maybe it isn't. Maybe the hardest thing I've ever had to admit is that I want more, that I deserve more. And tonight, as the rain falls and the city hums around me, I make myself a quiet promise I will find it. I will find that place where my strength is honored, not exploited, where my steadiness doesn't mean I have to carry everyone else's weight, where I can be exactly who I am, broad shoulders and rough hands, yes, but also someone who wants to be seen, someone who deserves to be. I don't know what comes next. But as I sit here, the city outside glowing softly in the rain, I know that I'm done waiting for someone else to tell me I'm enough. I know that the first step is saying it to myself. I am enough, and I am allowed to want more. Growing up, I learned early that some people are meant to be seen and some are meant to be leaned on. Scarlett was always the one everyone saw. With her fair hair and soft voice, she looked like she belonged on a music box spinning in circles while everyone watched. My mother used to brush Scarlett's hair so gently, her hands moving as if she was afraid of pulling too hard. She'd sigh and smile, saying, "She's as pretty as a doll, isn't she?" She never said things like that about me. My hair was dark and thick, stubborn, even when wet, and I'd long stopped letting her fuss with it. It didn't matter. My role was different. My job was to make sure Scarlett never lost her balance. My mother would ruffle my hair in passing and say, "You're strong, Clarissa. That's worth more than pretty curls." And for years I believed her. I can still remember one summer afternoon when I was about 8. We were outside in the backyard, the air heavy with the smell of cut grass. Scarlett had decided to host a tea party for her dolls under the old oak tree. She set out a tablecloth, cups of water that sparkled like diamonds in the sun, and cookies she'd begged my mother to bake. When she called for me, her voice soft and pleading, I went to her. I was already tall for my age, my knees bruised from climbing trees and carrying groceries for my mother. My mother's voice was in my head. "Scarlett's fragile. She needs your help." So I sat with her, careful not to tip over the tiny cups, careful not to ruin the fantasy she'd created. When my father came out to call us in for dinner, he stopped and watched. He smiled at Scarlett, his eyes warm and soft. "What a sweet scene," he said, his voice full of gentle pride. Then he turned to me and said, "You're a good girl for helping your sister Clarissa." Just like that. Scarlett was the one who made the scene sweet. I was the one who kept it from falling apart. It was such a small moment, but it stuck with me. Even then, I knew. Scarlett was delicate and I was dependable. She was cherished. I was expected. That line never really shifted as we grew older. If anything, it just settled deeper into the grooves of our family. I was the one who carried the groceries up the steps, the one who stayed up late to finish my homework while Scarlett drifted through school like a leaf on a river. My mother's voice was always there, a soft hum in the background. "Your sister needs you. She's sensitive. You're strong." By the time I turned 21, I'd almost gotten used to it. Almost. My birthday fell on a rainy Thursday that year, and I came home from work to find my mother waiting in the kitchen. She pressed a slim envelope into my hand. Inside was a savings book, a gentle nudge to keep planning, keep being responsible. "You're always so good with money," she said, her eyes already drifting past me to the stove, where she was making dinner. I thanked her, even though my heart sank a little. I knew I was supposed to be grateful. I was supposed to be the kind of daughter who didn't mind practical gifts. I told myself it was fine that being the strong one meant not needing anything else. But that night alone in my room, I traced the numbers on that savings book and felt a weight in my chest. It wasn't about the money. It was about how it felt to know that no one thought I'd ever need anything more than what I could provide for myself. A few years later, on Scarlett's 21st birthday, I watched as my parents threw her the kind of party I'd only seen in movies. Fairy lights strung across the backyard, music drifting through the warm evening air. Scarlett wore a pale blue dress that floated around her knees like a cloud, her golden hair pinned back with tiny pearl clips. My mother fussed over every detail. Scarlett's hair, Scarlett's makeup, Scarlett's nerves. My father beamed, holding a camera in his hands like he couldn't bear to miss a moment. I stood back watching it all, clapping politely when Scarlett blew out the candles on her cake. She looked like she was about to cry the way she always did when people sang happy birthday to her. And even though I loved her, even though I knew she didn't ask for the way she was put on a pedestal, I couldn't help the sting of it. Couldn't help the quiet voice inside me that whispered, "When do I get to be the one they see?" I told myself the same old story. Scarlett was fragile. Scarlett needed the softness of other people's hands. I was strong. I didn't need the glow of candles or the hush of a room waiting for me to speak. But the truth was, I did want it. I wanted to be seen, to be looked at, not with the eyes of someone expecting something from me, but with the eyes of someone who wanted to know me. The real me. The me who wasn't just the sum of what I could do for everyone else. That wanting sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and unmoving. For years I tried to bury it, to tell myself that needing anything at all was a betrayal of who I was. But some nights, especially the quiet ones, when the rain tapped gently at my window, I let myself feel it. Let myself wonder if there was a world where I could be both strong and loved, where I could be more than the sturdy shoulders everyone leaned on, where someone might see me, truly see me, and still think I was worth holding too. My grandfather Walter was the only one who ever made me feel seen. He'd lean back in his old armchair, the one with the worn arms and the squeaky springs, and tell me stories about his life. How he'd built everything he had from nothing, how he believed a person's worth wasn't measured in what they owned, but in how they carried themselves. Clarissa. He'd say, his voice warm and steady, "You have your own worth. Don't let anyone take that away from you." I carried those words like a secret, holding them close on the days when my shoulders felt too heavy and my smile too forced. They were my quiet promise that maybe, just maybe, someone in this world thought I was more than just the person who kept everything else from falling apart. When he got sick, I tried to be there as much as I could. I drove him to appointments, sat beside him in hospital waiting rooms that smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. He would squeeze my hand sometimes, his fingers gnarled and warm, and look at me like he knew I was carrying more than I'd ever admit. "You're a good one, Clarissa," he'd whisper. In those moments I felt like maybe I was. After he passed, the house felt emptier, like even the air was holding its breath. My parents moved through it with quiet efficiency, sorting through boxes, talking about the practicalities of death, as if that was all it was, a matter of paperwork and arrangements. I tried to do the same, to keep my back straight and my mouth shut. But underneath it all, there was a hope I couldn't quite kill, that when it came time to read his will, my grandfather would have left me something that said, "I saw you. I valued you for who you are." It wasn't about money. I didn't want a big share or some grand inheritance. I just wanted proof that he'd meant the things he'd whispered in those quiet, golden hours. The day we gathered in the lawyer's office, the air was thick with a kind of expectant hush. My parents sat close together, my mother's fingers resting lightly on my father's knee. Scarlett was there too, her hair shining like silk, her hands folded in her lap. She looked as delicate as ever, her eyes wide and wet at the corners, the very picture of gentle grief. People couldn't help but look at her, like she was a painting of loss, soft and perfect. I sat across from them, my hands folded tightly together. Mr. Franklin, the lawyer, adjusted his glasses and began. "Before we begin," he said, his voice calm and practiced, "I'd like to offer my condolences. Walter was a remarkable man." I nodded, swallowing against the knot in my throat. He was. He was the only one who ever looked past the strength in my shoulders to see the girl beneath. Mr. Franklin started with the house. It would go to my parents along with everything in it. My mother's lips pressed together, her expression calm and unsurprised. Next was the investment portfolio and a collection of rare coins, both left to Scarlett. She blinked in surprise, her lips parting slightly, but she didn't say anything. She never had to. Finally, Mr. Franklin's eyes found mine. To my granddaughter Clarissa, he read, "I leave my collection of books and the framed photograph of us fishing at the lake." The words hit me like a door slamming shut. Books and a photograph. No money, no property, Nothing that said, I see you. I know how hard you've worked. I love you for it. Just the things that had always been mine in the quiet hours of his study. Things that didn't cost a cent, but somehow cost everything. I looked down at my hands, the rough skin at my knuckles, and tried not to let the heat in my chest rise to my face. My mother shifted in her seat, her eyes flicking to me, and then away, a flicker of something like relief in her gaze. And I knew with a clarity that tasted bitter in my mouth that they had gotten to him. That in those last months when I was too busy working late shifts to be there every day, they had convinced him Scarlett needed it more. That I would be fine without it. After all, I always had been. Scarlett didn't say a word. She just reached for my mother's hand, her face soft and sorrowful, as if this wasn't exactly what she'd expected. I wondered if she even realized what it meant, that once again, she was the one everyone else had decided needed more, while I was the one who would manage with less. Mr. Franklin moved on, his voice a low drone in my ears. Distant cousins, old friends. Names and numbers I didn't hear. All I could think about was the photograph. Me, 8 years old, sitting in a rickety boat beside my grandfather, both of us grinning like we'd caught the whole world on our fishing lines. That picture was a memory I treasured, but now it felt like a consolation prize for all the ways I'd been told silently and over that my place was to hold everyone else's weight without complaint. When the meeting ended, my father stood and clapped a hand on my shoulder. Walter always knew you'd be fine, Clarissa, he said, his voice gentle, dismissive. You're strong. You don't need much. I wanted to ask him when my strength had become an excuse to give me nothing. But the words wouldn't come. They stuck in my throat, heavy as stones. I left that office with a stack of dusty books and a framed photograph, the edges of the paper worn smooth by years of being handled with care. I held them close, and in that moment I promised myself that no matter how hard it was, I would stop letting other people decide what I was worth. My grandfather's voice was still there in my memory, warm and certain. You have your own worth. And finally, I knew it was up to me to believe it. The house felt different after the will was read. Every corner, every shadow seemed to echo with things left unsaid. My mother moved through the kitchen with a kind of brittle energy, her hands busy but her eyes far away. My father spent more time in the garage fixing things that didn't need fixing, pretending the world was as simple as a broken hinge or a leaky faucet. I watched them both, feeling the weight of the silence between us like a stone in my chest. For so long I'd been the quiet one, the one who didn't ask questions because I thought asking was selfish. But that day something in me shifted. Maybe it was the hollow ache of being left out of my grandfather's promises. Maybe it was the slow burn of realizing that no one else was ever going to speak up for me. Either way, I couldn't swallow it down anymore. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the light turned everything soft and gold, I found my mother alone at the kitchen table. She was folding napkins for no reason at all, the neat corners stacking higher and higher. I leaned against the doorframe and took a deep breath. Mom, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Can I ask you something? She looked up, her fingers pausing on the fabric. Of course, Clarissa. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding. Why is it always me? I asked quietly. Why is it always me who has to be okay, who has to take care of everything? Why is Scarlett allowed to need so much, and I'm not allowed to need anything at all? My mother's lips parted, her brow creasing, as if she hadn't expected the question. Oh, Clarissa, she said softly. You know why. You've always been the strong one. You don't need as much. I shook my head. That's not an answer, Mom. That's an excuse. I'm tired of hearing how strong I am, like it's the only thing that matters. Scarlett's always been the one who needs saving, but I've been saving everyone else for years. Doesn't that count for something? She set the napkins down, her hands flattening against the table. Scarlett has always been fragile, she said, choosing the word carefully. She doesn't have what you have, Clarissa. She doesn't have your strength, your resilience. You've always been able to handle things on your own. I felt the words hit me like a slap. So because I'm strong, I'm supposed to be fine with never getting anything back. My voice rose sharper than I meant, but I didn't take it back. Because I'm strong, I don't deserve softness. I don't deserve help. She flinched just a little, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt, or just surprise that I was finally saying the thing I'd held inside for so long. Clarissa? She said, her voice firming as if she needed to remind herself who she was speaking to. You're the eldest. You've always been so capable. Your father and I, we know you'll land on your feet. Scarlett needs us more. She always has. I stared at her, the familiar kitchen around us feeling suddenly foreign. I thought of my grandfather's words, the way he'd told me not to let anyone take away my worth. And in that moment I saw it so clearly. The way my mother's eyes never softened when they looked at me, the way her love had always been conditional on my ability to carry the weight she didn't want to see. Scarlett needs you more, I repeated, my voice calm and quiet. And what about me? Have you ever even thought about what I need? Or am I just supposed to keep carrying everyone else until there's nothing left of me? She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue but didn't know how. In that pause, in the silence that stretched between us, I saw the truth settle in her eyes. She hadn't thought about it. Not really. Because in her mind, I didn't need anything. I was the one who held everyone else up, and that was enough. I took a step back, the air in the room feeling too close. I'm done, Mom, I said softly, but there was steel in my voice. I'm done pretending that's enough for me. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, the last rays of sun catching the rough skin of my hands. Hands that had held too much for too long. As I stepped outside, the cool evening air felt like a balm on my skin. I breathed it in, steady and deep, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to apologize for how solid I was, for how much space I took up. I realized in that moment that it wasn't my strength that had kept me going. It was the hope that one day someone would see past it and love me for everything else I was. But I couldn't wait for that anymore. I couldn't keep giving away every piece of myself just because they said I didn't need it. Standing in the twilight, I felt a quiet certainty settle into my bones. I wouldn't ask again. I wouldn't beg for their approval or their kindness. If I kept bending myself to fit into the spaces they made for me, I'd end up disappearing altogether. No, I wouldn't let that happen. I'm done searching for their recognition. I know now that if I keep giving everything, there will be nothing left that's truly mine. And I'm not willing to lose myself for anyone. Not anymore. Sometimes I wonder if there's a ledger somewhere in the universe with my name on it. A record of every dollar I've sent, every small kindness I've given without asking for anything back. If such a ledger exists, it would be a long one. Over the last 7 years, I've sent more money than I care to admit. More than $55,000 if I'm counting every last penny. I've paid to fix the roof that leaked every time the rain came hard in winter. I've paid down the credit card bills that kept creeping back no matter how many times I reminded my parents about budgets and careful spending. I've covered hospital bills for Scarlett when she fell sick. The quiet panic in my mother's voice on the phone telling me we just can't let her go without what she needs. The first few times I didn't think twice. I was their daughter. Scarlett was my sister. It felt like what I was supposed to do. Like if I didn't help, I was somehow failing them. And I could help. I always found a way, even if it meant skipping dinners out or wearing the same winter coat year after year. My mother would say, Scarlett can't work right now. She's too stressed. My father would say, You're so good with money, Clarissa. You always figure it out. And I did. But every time I told myself it would be the last. That once I covered the overdue bills or the copays or the loan that was about to default, I'd be done. That surely they would see how much I'd already given, but of course it was never the last time. I remember those nights more clearly than I wish I did. Sitting at the small kitchen table in my apartment, the only light coming from the lamp I kept on the counter. The glow was soft and golden, but it didn't reach the shadows that always seemed to gather around me. My laptop opened, the screen casting that cold blue light across my face. My fingers hovering over the keyboard, my heart in my throat. Every time I paused, just for a second, I'd hover there, my mind racing with the things I wanted to say. This isn't fair. This isn't mine to fix. But the words never made it past my lips, and the money always went out. A few keystrokes, a few clicks, and it was done. A piece of me sent out into the world, no receipt, no return. Some nights after the transfer was made, I'd close the laptop and sit there, my hands wrapped around the lukewarm cup of tea I'd forgotten to drink. The apartment would be silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator, and I'd let myself feel the weight of it all. Not the money, though that was part of it, but the way each request chipped away at something inside me. The way it always felt like I was giving away pieces of myself one transaction at a time. I don't blame them. At least that's what I tell myself. I know my parents didn't set out to turn me into their safety net. I know Scarlett never asked me outright to save her, but the quiet expectations were there in every phone call, every message. You're the strong one, Clarissa. You're always so capable. We're family. Of course we help each other. Words that sounded like love but felt like a noose around my neck. And me, I let them. I told myself that love meant saying yes even when I wanted to say no. That being the strong one meant I wasn't allowed to be tired or lonely or resentful. So I said yes, over and over and over. I've always been good at numbers, budgets, spreadsheets. I've made them for myself and for the companies I've worked for. Sometimes late at night I'd open a new sheet just for this. Just for them. I'd list every payment I'd sent, the $500 for the roof repair, the $1,200 for the credit cards, the thousands for Scarlett's hospital stays. I'd see the total at the bottom, the sum of all my silences, and I'd close the laptop again because the sight of it made my throat ache. $55,000. Enough for a down payment on a small house, or for the trip to Italy I'd always dreamed of. Enough for all the things I'd never let myself want because someone else needed it more. I don't resent them, not really. But sometimes sitting there in the half-light of my kitchen, I'd wonder if they even realized what it cost me, not just in money, but in the small, quiet dreams I never spoke aloud. The dreams I set aside because I believed it was my job to hold everyone else together. I don't blame them. But I am starting to wonder when it became so easy to forget that I might need someone to catch me too. One night after I'd sent another transfer I couldn't really afford, I closed the laptop and pressed my forehead to the cool, chipped surface of the table. My breath fogged the wood, and I heard myself whisper so soft I almost didn't catch it. Who will pay me back for the dreams I never got to chase? There was no answer, of course. Just the quiet, the hush of the apartment, the rain tapping gently against the window. But in that silence, something inside me shifted. I realized that it wasn't really about the money anymore. It was about the slow erosion of my own life. $1, one promise, one quiet sacrifice at a time. I didn't know what to do with that realization yet, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. The call came on a Wednesday evening, the kind of gray Seattle night that made the city feel like it was wrapped in a damp hush. I was sitting at my kitchen table, my laptop open to a spreadsheet I'd been updating for work, the quiet tap of keys the only sound in the room. When the phone rang, I almost didn't answer. But I saw my mother's name on the screen, and something in me sighed, resigned. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice calm out of habit. "Clarissa." She said, her tone carefully measured. "Your father and I were talking, and we have an idea. Something that could really help Scarlett." I closed the laptop slowly, the edge of the table cool beneath my palms. "What is it?" I asked. "There's a program Scarlett wants to start. A small business, something that could finally give her some independence," she said, her voice bright with the kind of hope I'd heard 1,000 times before. "She's so passionate about it, Clarissa. She just needs a little bit to get started." I could already feel where this was going, my stomach tightening even as I tried to keep my voice neutral. "How much?" I asked. My mother hesitated, then said, "She needs $5,000. But it would be an investment in her future. Like planting a seed, $5,000. My mind immediately went to the savings I'd scraped together in the past year, the little cushion that let me sleep at night. But I already knew they weren't talking about my savings. They were talking about my car. The old, reliable car I'd bought after 4 years of double shifts and careful budgeting. The one thing that felt like it was truly mine. "You're asking me to sell my car," I said quietly, no question in my tone. "It would mean so much to Scarlett," my mother said, her voice gentle, persuasive. "And you're so good at making things work, Clarissa. You've always found a way." I sat there staring at the chipped edge of the table, my breath caught in my throat. My car wasn't new or fancy, but it was freedom. It was late-night drives when I needed to clear my head, early morning commutes that let me leave everything else behind for a few minutes. It was mine in a way nothing else had ever been. I pictured the years I'd spent saving for it, years of saying no to coffee dates, to new shoes, to anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Every mile I'd driven in that car felt like a testament to my own quiet perseverance, and now they wanted me to give that up too. For a moment I couldn't speak. My mother kept talking, her words a soft hum I barely heard. All I could think about was how this was the final piece, the last thing that was still just mine. If I gave this up, what would I have left? I stood up slowly, the chair scraping against the worn tile. I walked to the small mirror hanging by the door, the one I always checked before leaving the apartment. My reflection stared back at me. Shoulders, broad hair pulled back, eyes steady. For the first time, I saw not just the strength in that reflection, but the quiet desperation I'd been carrying for years. I took a deep breath, my phone still pressed to my ear. "Mom," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not going to sell my car." She went quiet on the other end. I could hear the confusion, the surprise. "Clarissa," she said slowly, "you don't have to be selfish about this. Scarlett needs this. You can always get another car later." "No," I interrupted, my voice steady and low. "I'm not selling my car, and I'm not sending any more money. Not for Scarlett, not for anyone." There was a pause, heavy, disbelieving. "Clarissa," my father's voice came on the line, deep and familiar. "This is your family. You don't just turn your back when they need you." "I'm not turning my back," I said. "I'm just done being the only one who's expected to sacrifice everything. I'm done being the family's wallet. I'm still your daughter. I'll always be your daughter, but I won't be your ATM anymore." The words settled into the silence like stones dropped into water. I could hear my mother's breathing, the quiet disbelief crackling through the line. I almost expected her to start crying to tell me I was being cruel, but there was nothing, just a stunned quiet that felt like the final act of a play I was no longer part of. I lowered the phone slowly, ending the call without waiting for a response. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, something like relief. I stood there staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were bright, my jaw set. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the girl who was always trying to prove she was good enough. I saw a woman who had finally decided to be enough for herself. In that quiet, empty kitchen, I took one long breath and let it fill every part of me. And when I let it out, I felt the weight of years of quiet sacrifices lift just enough for me to stand a little straighter. That night, in the stunned silence that followed my words, I looked at my reflection and saw someone I'd never really seen before. Someone who was done giving away pieces of herself to people who only ever saw what she could do for them. And for the first time, my hands didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. In the glass, I saw my own eyes, clear, unflinching, and finally certain. The messages started coming the next morning. My phone buzzed so often it felt like an accusation in my hand. At first they were soft pleading, "Scarlett's falling apart, Clarissa. She's not eating, she's barely sleeping. She needs your help." Then they shifted, growing sharper. "Your father's been having chest pains. He won't say it, but he's worried sick about you." Each message another stone thrown into the calm I'd found in myself. I read them all in silence, my thumb hovering over the keyboard more than once. But I didn't answer. I wouldn't answer. Because I knew how it would go. Every word I wrote would only be twisted into proof that I could be guilted back into line. For years I'd been so easy to pull back. One sigh from my mother, one tear from Scarlett, and I'd bend all over again. But something had changed in me the night I said no. Something that wouldn't bend anymore. A few days later, my parents invited me to the house. "Just to talk," my mother said, her voice carefully neutral on the phone. I knew what was waiting for me, but I went anyway. I think I needed to see it, to stand in the middle of it and know that this time I wouldn't let them fold me back into the shape they wanted. When I walked in, the living room was full. My parents on the couch, Scarlett sitting close beside them, her eyes wide and watery. My aunt and uncle sat across from them, their faces pinched in polite concern. Even my cousin was there, slouched in the corner, his phone in his hand like he couldn't decide if he was part of this or just a witness. They all looked up when I entered. For a moment no one spoke. The silence felt thick, heavy with expectation. My father was the first to break it. "Clarissa," he said, his voice carefully calm, "we're worried about you. This decision you've made, it isn't like you." I took a breath, feeling the weight of their eyes. "It is like me," I said quietly. "It's just not the version of me you're used to." My mother's lips tightened. "We've always counted on you," she said. "You're the strong one. You've never turned your back on family." I looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes were pleading, but there was something else there too. A kind of disbelief, like she couldn't quite understand how her oldest daughter had become someone she didn't recognize. "I'm not turning my back," I said, my voice calm and low. "I'm just done being the one who's expected to hold everything up. I'm done being the one who never gets to need anything in return." Scarlett's eyes welled with tears and she reached for my hand. "Clarissa, please," she whispered. "I don't know what I'll do if you're not here to help me." I pulled my hand back gently. "I'm still your sister Scarlett, but I won't keep sacrificing my life to fix yours." My uncle leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "Don't you see how this looks?" he said. "Turning away from your family. People will think you're selfish, ungrateful." I straightened my back. The broadness of my shoulders no longer something I wanted to hide. "I'm not cutting anyone off," I said clearly. "I'm not closing my heart to this family. But I am closing my wallet, and I am closing the door to the part of me that says I have to give everything just because you all expect it." For a moment there was nothing but silence. I could feel the shape of it in the air, like the room was holding its breath. My mother looked at me like she didn't recognize the woman standing in front of her. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. I let the quiet stretch out, let it settle around me like a new kind of armor. "I'm not angry," I said finally. "I don't hate any of you. But I can't keep giving until there's nothing left of me. I'm done living like the only way to be loved here is to bleed myself dry." Scarlett let out a small sob, and my mother reached for her hand, her own eyes glistening. But I didn't move to comfort them. For the first time, I let their disappointment be theirs alone. I didn't take it on. I didn't let it become another weight across my shoulders. I turned to go, and in the mirror by the door, I caught a glimpse of myself. My shoulders were still broad, my hands still rough and strong, but in my eyes, I saw something new, something steady and sure. I wasn't leaving as the victor of some grand battle. I wasn't walking out with anyone's approval. But I was leaving with something I'd never had before, my own quiet conviction that I was allowed to stop. As I reached for the door, I paused. My voice was calm, but it didn't waver. "I'm not cutting off my family," I said, my back to them. "I'm cutting off the part of me that lets you keep taking because you think I'll never say no." No one said a word. The room was as still as the hush before a storm. I stepped outside into the cool evening air, the door clicking shut behind me. My heart was pounding, but I didn't feel fear. I felt clear, like I'd finally found the edges of myself and decided to honor them. I walked down the path away from that house, away from the quiet judgment of people who would never understand. I wasn't the hero in that moment. I wasn't the villain either. I was just me, strong, steady, and no longer willing to trade my life for someone else's comfort. 6 months have passed since that last family meeting. It's strange how much can change in such a short stretch of time. How the threads of your life can be rewoven stronger and brighter than before once you let go of everything that was never truly yours to carry. I live in a small apartment now, one with tall windows that let in the soft morning light. Most mornings I stand at the window with a cup of coffee cradled in my hands, watching the sun turn the city gold. It's a ritual that grounds me, a way to remind myself that there is warmth in the world that doesn't demand anything from me. The apartment is simple, but it feels like mine in a way nothing else ever has. There's a second-hand couch in the corner, a battered wooden table by the window, and the books my grandfather left me stacked neatly on the shelves. Some nights I still sit and run my fingers along their spines, remembering the way he told me, You have your own worth, Clarissa. I carry those words with me everywhere now like a quiet shield. Work has settled into a rhythm. I've taken on new projects at the firm, projects that challenge me in the best way, without draining me dry. My boss notices the work I do, and my colleagues respect the lines I draw. It's not everything, but it's enough for now. More important than work, though, are the people I've let into my life. Friends who don't see me as the one who always says yes, who never assumes I'm fine just because I don't ask for help. We meet for coffee on Saturday mornings, laughter spilling out across chipped mugs. Some nights we cook together in someone's cramped kitchen, music playing in the background, the air warm with shared stories. They've taught me that family isn't built by blood alone. It's built by the choice to see and to honor each other exactly as we are. I've been saving too. Not for anyone else, but for a dream that slowly started to take shape in the quiet hours when I let myself imagine what comes next. I want to open a small fund, a grant maybe, something to support women like me, women who've spent too long giving everything away, who need a hand to build something for themselves. I don't know all the details yet, but I know how it will feel, like planting seeds in soil that's finally been cleared of rocks, like making sure no one else has to feel like their whole worth is tied up in what they can give away. Sometimes I still think about my family, about the house I grew up in and the people who taught me how to be strong, but never how to be soft. I don't think they understand even now why I chose to step back. I don't think they ever will. And that's all right. I don't wait for an apology anymore. I don't wait for the day they'll say, "We see you now. We understand." Because I've realized that waiting for someone else to validate your worth is a kind of slow death. It keeps you trapped in the same old dance, reaching out for something that was never meant for you. I don't hate them. I don't even resent them, not really. I understand that they only ever saw what they wanted to see. That doesn't mean I have to live with it. What matters is that I understand who I am, and that I finally believe it's enough. This morning, I stood at the window with my coffee and let the sun wash over me. The steam rose in gentle curls, and for a moment, I closed my eyes and let myself feel the quiet peace of that warmth. I thought of all the nights I'd spent worrying about being enough, about whether love meant giving until you had nothing left. And I thought of how different it feels now to know that I don't have to prove myself to anyone, that I don't owe anyone the pieces of myself I used to hand over without question. I thought of the words I've whispered to myself in the dark, the ones that have become my quiet mantra: I am allowed to want. I am allowed to hold something back for myself. I am allowed to choose me. I don't know what comes next, not exactly, but for the first time that uncertainty doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like possibility, like a door swinging open on a room I've never let myself enter before. And as I stood there, I realized something else. Something I'd been circling around for years without ever quite saying it out loud. I'm not waiting for them to understand. I'm not begging to be seen anymore. I just want them to know that I am done owing them my life. That I am done giving until I have nothing left. That I am done asking for permission to live a life that belongs only to me. I don't need them to say sorry. I don't need them to see me the way I see myself now. All I need is this one truth: I deserve a life that's gentle, a life that's mine, and I owe no one an apology for choosing it. Family isn't about blood. It isn't about the people who raised you if they never learned to respect who you really are. Family is the people who see you and say, "You don't have to earn this. You already are enough." Family is where you're allowed to be whole. I've chosen to be that kind of family for myself, and for the first time I know that's enough. If you've ever found yourself carrying more than your fair share, if you've ever felt the quiet ache of giving until you were empty, I hope Clarissa's story reminds you that you're not alone. What would it look like if you chose to hold something back for yourself? To say no, not out of anger, but out of love for the person you're becoming? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever reached a point where you had to stand your ground for your own peace? What did that moment look like for you? Let's keep this conversation going. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I always read them, and I'm so grateful for every voice that joins in. And if you found a piece of yourself in this story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. There are so many more stories to share, and I'd love for you to be a part of this community. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth is not measured by what you give. You deserve to be seen and you deserve to rest.